All right, and we are live. The plan today is to talk about cooler slides, and I know I say it every time, but I'm really jazzed up for this one. It's going to be a really, really good show. We're going to show you how you install our cooler slides. But before we get into that, let's talk about just super high level, and I know it's probably intuitive to most, but why if you're a boater, do you want a cooler slide?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, really sometimes it's a pain in the neck to try to, get the cooler in and out from underneath the leaning post, especially the larger the cooler gets. If you load it down with drinks and ice, it really doesn't give you the capability to do that easily without
Sometimes
picking it up.
Sometimes it's impossible, right? I mean, this is a medium-sized cooler. You load up a much bigger cooler than this with ice and drinks, you're not pulling that dang thing out from under it.
And a lot of the leaning posts, if you've got a cooler this size underneath it that may have like a tackle storage, you've got very little clearance that's underneath that, right? So it becomes impractical to lift the lid up, right? We were joking earlier, if anybody wants to go out to the sandbar, have a watermelon on the boat, the only way to get that out would be to pull the cooler out, drop the watermelon in, or anything that's large for that matter, right?
Absolutely. Jared loves his watermelons.
I do.
All right. So, we've established, the most basic example of where, a cooler slide is a benefit. The other thing is, of course, you can slide it out and it serves as a secondary seat. A lot of people keep it slid out and they do have a little bit of a backrest. So I know seating a lot of times is very limited on a boat. But moving on from that. So, I want to show you our best-selling cooler slide here and kind of how it comes. And what you're looking at here is what you get. So there is some assembly required, and we're going to do the entire assembly process right here on the live stream, and I promise you it's not going to be long. So you can see it comes, and there are two main pieces, right? This is the main left and the main right part of the cooler slide, all fully assembled. And then it comes with some extra spanners here. We're going to talk about the spanners in detail as we get into the installation, but you're actually only going to use one pair of these spanners. We do have 3 different sizes. Some of the sizes don't have all of the spanners. So the largest cooler slide doesn't have the small spanners, and the small cooler slide doesn't have the large. The medium, which is what we're going to use on this Yeti 65, has all 3, so that you can select the one that fits the size of your cooler. So this is how it comes, but what I want to do is go right into how we do the install.
Absolutely.
So Jared, let's flip this thing over. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to quickly take you over to the website, and I want to show you a couple of customer photos so that you can get a feel for, how this has been used in the field. This is a part that we've built for, probably going on 4 or 5 years at this point. So there's a lot of these in the field. You've got really good reviews, and you can see that it's been used on a variety of different coolers. We flipped through some Yetis. I think as we get here, we'll get into some of the different, what is that?
That's like an igloo there.
An igloo?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, a lot of the kind of rugged boxes, Arctic, Yeti, that's an igloo box earlier. The nice thing is we'll get into the way that it installs. You can really use this cooler slide on any cooler that's out there. There's a kind of a frigid, rigid style deal. There looks like that's like an Ozark Trail, the Walmart brand. So again, it's unique in that it covers pretty much every type of cooler that's out there on the market.
And these are all just photos that customers who have purchased this and installed on their boat have sent to us to be able to upload on the website. So let's get right in. Now that we've kind of zoomed in or looking at the bottom side, let's flip back over and let's look at this cooler. So the first step of installation is to flip your cooler over.
Correct. So now we've got the cooler over sitting on the lid of the cooler. Let's go ahead and grab a couple of these individual pieces for the slide. So you've got this piece here that's going to go directly on the front. And then similarly, there's one that's on the back. So we're going to start with this. Now the first step is to slide this slider out. And you can see, I'm going to tilt this forward. You can see where we've milled into the material, and there's 2 separate screws here. So the function
of slotted. Right? Yeah, they're inside of a slot.
So the function of that is that you see right here, I've got a little bit of wiggle room between that front edge that it's captured. So you're going to take this and slide it on and push it as close as you can to the front of your cooler. And then at this point, you're going to push this in that slotted area to capture your cooler width-wise, or pardon me, depth-wise. So now that's nice and tight there. The next thing is just with these 2 screws is to tighten them down nice and secure. So I'm going to quickly tighten those in.
So while you do this, we'll talk about, okay, what have we done? So now we have sized this half of the cooler slide front to back with the depth of the cooler. It's
Correct.
custom fitting this Yeti 65 front to back.
Correct. So let's do the exact same thing with the backside. So same exact way, slide this forward. You've got the same way that you want to make sure it captures the front, and slide this edge in. So at that point, I'm nice and tight to the width and the depth of the cooler. Again, we've got 2 screws here, so I'm able to quickly tighten those down.
Beautiful.
And now we're done with the first step.
Okay, so now we've fit the cooler front to back on
Correct.
both sides. So we are going to spin this. All right, so now we get into the spanners that I mentioned earlier. Now, hypothetically, you don't even need these spanners. You could mount this just how it is. We have elected to do, to supply spanners for a very specific reason. And that reason is that when you're installing cooler slides, the most important thing is that they are perfectly parallel. If they are off, at all, then you are, in a really bad spot. Your cooler is going to bind when you pull it out. So these spanners help make sure that you lock in these 2 units and make them perfectly parallel.
And even more so when it's weighted down, right? If it's not completely parallel, that's going to bind up in that track system. So again, something that's very unique about our coolers. So I'm going to tilt this up to show them where it's actually milled into the front here.
Perfect.
So you'll see on the front, Andrew, if you want to point out, we've got threaded inserts that are pressed in there.
So we've got these slots that these spanners are going to go, and then we've got threaded inserts, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a total of 8, and you come in here and you select your spanner. So I've got my small one right here, and I can lay it over, and I can see, well, that's not long enough, right? It doesn't capture all 4 of the spanners. So I know I need to upgrade to my medium spanner, and I can see my medium spanner is going to fit down in that slot, and I'm going to be able to get to all 4 of the studs. So let's set it back down, and let's go ahead and install those spanners.
Perfect. So if you want to grab me the other spanner, and then we'll screw it in here together.
So these are, they can be a little bit tight. They're tight on purpose. You don't want this to move it all on you, but you should be able to get them down inside the slot. Here we go. Boom.
Excellent. So if you want to throw 2 screws in that side. So right now we're going to just put 4 screws in here, 4 bolts. Again, these machine bolts or machine screws go directly into these threaded inserts. There are 8 of them in total. We supply all of the hardware to get this done, but just in the interest of time, we're going to put 4 in here to show you.
Now the nice thing about it being a threaded insert is that if you ever need to repurpose this whole thing for a different size cooler, you don't have any stripped holes. You're able to switch out your spanner or just move your spanner down if you need to, and you don't have a hole that you can't go back into.
Yeah, I think that, kind of rehashing what you said there, these are going to hold up for years on your boat, to where you may decide that that cooler's too small, I want something bigger, I want a different style. With the way this is configured, you're easily able to adjust these spanners and switch out the model of cooler you have.
So we have now fit this cooler slide to fit your cooler perfectly, this 75 Yeti. So let's go ahead and pull these in. Now what I want to do is show you, again, we call them universal cooler slides. They're only universal to a certain degree. That we do have a small, medium, and large, and each of those sizes cover a certain range. So I want to go and take you over to the website one more time here, and I want to show you the different widths and depths that we accommodate. So like we're working on right now the medium cooler slide, and the medium cooler slide fits any cooler widths from 18 to 41 inches and any depth that's 14.5 by 17.5 inches. And we've taken the time to actually go through, and we have a lot of the very common coolers listed below and the sizes that are required. So in many cases, you don't even necessarily need to measure your cooler to see if you need a small, medium, and large. You can just come in and cross-reference this table.
Where there is important to measure, I'd like to click down actually to where we have that how to measure drawing. Walk them through this as far as how much extra room you need to make sure that you have the clearance or the footprint underneath your leaning post.
So this cooler is going to raise up the height of your cooler, and down at the bottom you can see the before and the after, right? Here's where my cooler's sitting on the ground, here's where my cooler's sitting on top of the slides. So the cooler slide does raise your cooler by 2 inches.
Right.
So you do need to have 2 inches of space between the top of your cooler right now and your leaning post where it sits. The other thing is you do need to check your width. Now, it's not shown on that diagram. In fact, we probably need to get it added, and we will after this, after this Facebook Live. But the cooler slide adds 3.5 inches of total width. Now, it's not all on one side or anything like that. I think it's 2.5 on one side because one side has a latch, and 1 on the other side where it doesn't have a latch. But what you do need to do is you need to take your cooler that's in that area, and you need to slide it all the way to one side and measure and make sure you have at least 3.5 inches of slop, of extra space, from between the width of your leaning post and your cooler.
Yep, so it's going to overall grow the footprint of your cooler 2 inches in height.
Correct.
And then in width, 3.5 inches.
Absolutely. You got
Awesome.
it. And then, in depth, it does grow it a little bit. We should probably know that. It varies by the size, but that's generally less critical because the idea of your cooler sticking out by 1.5 inches, really doesn't make that big of a difference. So generally, your depth is not a major consideration.
Sure.
So let's switch back over now that we're kind of ready to flip this thing over and look at it. Let me get my cooler or get my other spanners out of the way here.
So here's where we left it, right? Everything was captured from left to right, front to back. So the next step is to install it to the boat, right? So we're going to do everything for you all the way up until we're not screwing it down to the table here, but we'll show you how easy that is. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off.
Let's do it. Flip
if
it.
you want to hold this real quick for me here, I'll slide the cooler out of the way.
All right, so at this point we have our cooler slide, and this is sized now for your cooler.
Correct.
So we got to mount it to the boat.
Yep, so I'm going to lean this up real quick so you can see where we have already pre-drilled installation holes in this deck here that goes into the back of these sliders, right? So you can see the sliders back here coming out. Basically, you'll drop that straight down on the deck of the boat, locate where you want that, and then we provide these lag screws that you'll just lag directly through these holes into the deck of the boat.
And one thing I want to reiterate, because it's just so important, is the beautiful thing about these spanners is you now know when you mount this that your slides are parallel, that
Right.
You're not going to have binding when you open and close this. You can just come right down here and screw it in. If you have, for some reason, limited access, you can spin it here.
Yep.
You can got hooked up. You can pull it out so that you're going down through here as well. You have that option. But we have set it up so that in the closed position, they all line up. The holes through the top mirror the holes through the bottom that you're actually going to hold down to.
Which is super easy. I mean, the unique thing about this again is that it acts as a template. So you just locate it where you want. You drive those lag screws directly in the deck of the boat. That's pretty much the full assembly. So now that we've got to this point, let's test it out.
See how we did. Let's get the handles out of the way.
So we're able to take the cooler, drop it right back in place.
It fits.
It fits right in.
It's like we designed it for
as
that.
the slides, I'll grab from this side since it's not lagged down.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of show them it sliding out, it's hooked up on the hook there.
Oh, it's on the hook.
One of the things we didn't do is hook the handles. So you can see that slides out pretty easy. Slides right back into place.
Money.
While we do have it turned, I'm going to kind of walk over here. We didn't discuss the handles. I think this is pretty unique as well. So, this doesn't really work for this Yeti size, but you can see that we've also provided a shorter hook to be able to grab that Yeti handle. So you've got 2 different sizes here that are available, again, securing the cooler down to the actual cooler slide itself.
Beautiful. Do we have any questions? Let's check out. We've got some listed here. Are you looking forward to a video watching special? So we don't have any special discounts right now. Though we should do that. We might do that in the future. You'll have to tune in to see if we do any kind of specials or discounts for people that are watching the videos. Sarah asks, is there a locking mechanism to keep the cooler from sliding out when it's underway? So yes, there is, and I'm glad you asked that. Let's actually spin it all the way around and let's look at it here. So we have a latch, and that latch runs inside of a mill.
And it's just a pull pin, right? So you're able to pull it, twist, it locks down in place. That's nice and secured. Pull, and it locks or unlocks there. So again, pretty easy. And the nice thing is it locks in this position, but also when the cooler's all the way out. So the person that's sitting on it's not going to be moving back and forth on the boat when it's running.
And this is a good opportunity to quickly, we've shown you how to install. I'll take a quick second and shamelessly kind of plug our cooler slides and why we think we make the best one on the market. And one of the ones that I hadn't even written down or thought about is we do use this pin. Mm-hmm. This pin is a lift and twist that locks in the open position, or you can keep it to where it's spring loaded. You can see right now I'm lifting. It's actually covered by something. Let's switch right here. You can see right now I pull and it drops back down to engage and lock. But if I want to keep my cooler open, which a lot of times you might want to do that because when there's so much weight, you don't really need to worry about the thing like sliding shut or anything like that. So you can actually lift ours and twist, and you can see there it just stayed in the open position, right? It's up. So this can freely slide in and out, which a lot of times is really convenient, or you can twist it back and just keep it spring loading. So we do have a little bit nicer locking mechanism than some of the other ones on the market. The other things that we think that really sets ours apart are the spanners. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's really important that these things are parallel or you're going to have some issues. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the universalness of the slide itself, right? Again, it's an investment. These are not inexpensive. They're built very well. Here at Boat Outfitters, Teak Isle, we pride ourselves in the products we make. This is something that you're going to be able to, like I said earlier, have a lot of life out of. And, part of that some of these coolers don't last as long. So being able to quickly switch this out to accommodate your new cooler with the different spanners, I think is pretty unique to our design.
Awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate you hanging in with us.
I think we've got a couple more questions over here.
All right, let's see. Is there a way it could slide vertically instead of horizontally? Between white, and seafoam color. So I can show the difference between white, and seafoam color. Let's see, do I have a sample chain? I know there's somewhere in the office here.
I think we've got white, and seafoam as a tool holder in one of those boxes there. To answer the question vertically instead of horizontally, so that's just all in how you configure your cooler, right? So I'll let you go ahead and open up that sample chain to show the differences. If you configure your cooler widthwise versus lengthwise, that's something that can absolutely be done. I think that the only barrier to that would of course be how much you're accommodating. I would probably want a little bit more context, but give us a call. Again, we do a lot of custom stuff. If you've got a specific cooler in mind that this needs to fit, we'd love to help you on that project.
So as I show you here, and I'm probably going to need to walk to get a little bit closer to the camera, the white, and the seafoam, you can see that I doubt on the camera you're going to hardly notice much of a difference at all. Let's see if we can get it to focus. Is it focused?
That's Arctic white and white.
This is Arctic white and white. So
and there's seafoam there.
Here's seafoam. So here's white, and seafoam. Excuse me. So the seafoam is a slightly off-white. We call it off-white eggshell color. It's used by Boston Whaler for years. It's still in production with a lot of different boat builders. And it's just a little bit yellower, a little bit more off-white. And I guess, I'd be remiss in not mentioning that another advantage of purchasing the cooler slides here is that we are able to build this in white, Arctic white, and seafoam. We can do some other custom colors. There's some limitations because there's some 3/4 inch material that we don't necessarily have in every color. But if you had an off-white boat, we could build your cooler slides in seafoam or Arctic white if you didn't want the white.
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity to talk about the sample chain again real quick, guys. This is something that you will probably start to sound like a broken record on. And you're going to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on different parts to add to your boat. The worst thing that you want is for it to be a color mismatch. So, we sell this less than, basically we're losing money when we send one of these out.
It's $10 and that includes the shipping. You can see, you're talking about whatever, 8 or 9 different materials we got to put up on the CNC router, cut, then hand route, then put in a chain with the, we're not making any money on the $10. We're trying to cover some of our costs. And if you're ever working on a big project with us, let us know and we can maybe even comp you a sample chain. We're not trying to make money on it. We're trying to make sure that you're happy with what you get. And I've said it before, 2 different whites on a boat can look really bad. So it's definitely something to keep in mind for sure.
Great question.
Cool. Got a couple more. Let's see. May have missed it, but does this work on an uneven deck? And will it work on sea deck? So we have done it where it rolls on sea deck. On an uneven deck, I would need to check.
Yeah, I think, C-deck for sure, right? I mean, the failure point would be the material over time. The nice thing, Andrew, and I don't know if we covered this completely earlier, the components of our slides are pretty much all poly, aside from the inserts that are brass inserts we're putting in that latch at the front. So, the poly wheels aren't probably going to mar the C-deck as much as if you had, like a bearing
metal
wheel
track
or
or
metal
something.
track or something on there. So
You're saying, so there are some wheels, we kind of really quickly got into how to install it, but kind of looking at some of the more detailed part of it, this is 2 pieces of material. This does slide on wheels, and these wheels are somewhat suspended. They're really just to help lubricate that front. As you get further off the back track, the front starts to sag a little bit more, and you start to want these wheels so that it slides smoother.
Right.
But there is a little bit of a gap. Now, if you had some crazy thick EVA foam, right, and you were trying to mount this on fiberglass right in front of super thick EVA foam, there's a certain point at which that's going to block where you're going here.
like a thicker helm pad, right?
Like a thicker helm pad, right? But if you're talking about 1/8 inch, or what is it, like 6 millimeter? Well, what's the standard?
6 mil standard.
It will slide on it, but to your point, it could over time wear down the C-deck right where you slide on it, potentially.
But it's not going to grab or snag, right? I mean, that the poly is very low snag, and I think gliding over the top of that material for what it's used for, right? In the way that it's created, I don't think you'd have any issues installing this on a deck that had some type of EVA foam liner that's been put in.
Now, an uneven deck is more interesting, and I'd have to understand more context. I would reach out to us and help us understand what you're talking about. Just like I'm talking about them having to be parallel, it's very important that those things slide together and move together. And the idea of them being on a different plane, I get a little bit concerned about it wanting to grind. But I would need to know a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish, and maybe we could work with you on that. Maybe a shim underneath it might be a solution.
Yeah, and I'll throw out maybe an idea. Let's say that underneath the leaning post, sometimes there's a little access plate that's down there, right? So the nice thing about this, and where it grows at 2 inches in height, is there is absolutely at least an inch of room underneath these spanners to the deck of the boat. So if you've got an uneven deck and you're referencing that if I set a cooler directly on there, I've got that 6-inch access plate that kind of makes a little bit of a bubble. This is going to help that problem because it sits up off the deck high enough to where that access plate would be in the middle, that it would slide directly over the top of it.
Yeah, and you can see it. I mean, if you took this off, you could see it. It like you say, it has some height underneath it. Let's see, we got a couple more questions. Looks awesome, guys. The one with the compartments above it looked really versatile. How big of a cooler do you make them up to? That's a great question. So let's flip back over real quick to the website, and let's go to the fitting guide. Scroll up and go to the fitting guide. So the large, you can see that we can accommodate a cooler up to 49 inches wide. And then from a depth perspective, we can fit up to 20.5 inches deep. Now, caveat, 48 inches wide is the max that my large spanner is gonna fit. Okay, if you can get them perfectly perpendicular, which you can, it's just you got to really know what you're doing and make sure you get them mounted down. We could go even wider on a cooler. Now your depth is fixed, right? We can't go any deeper than, what did I say, 20.5 inches deep. So that is the maximum cooler width that we can fit with this design. I'll say though that if you run across a bigger cooler than that you want to do something with, please give us a call. We've got a team of people over there that are working on custom projects all day long. We've got a team of engineers that would love to work with you on something custom and something bigger. What else we got? Awesome, cool. Kudos for the great products and answers. We really appreciate it.
Thank
we
you.
love questions. We want this to turn into more of a
community
Q&A session. Just live. You ask us, we'll answer. So we really appreciate the participation and the questions. With that, though, I think we've covered the cooler side really well. It's an awesome product. We really think you guys should consider it if you have a cooler underneath the leaning post and you need it to slide. That's what it does. Thanks. Have a great day.